Special Spotlight Edition. As we tune into the voice of the man called Hugh Mundell, as he asks the musical question, why do black men fuss and fight on this earth when I know we are all Selassie children? But some of them are trying to play the game unfair. A man called Hugh Mundell, all of about 14 years old when he recorded this. One of the most prodigious talents arising out of Jamaica in the 1970s. Switching here from singing to DJing in a deeply cultural vibe. Rastafari. Deeply cultural mode. With the black arc sound of Lee Perry. This one, a really hi-fi styley, effortlessly switching from singing to DJing, chatting on the mic, feeling the flow of the rhythm. Hugh Mundell was one of the most prodigious artists to arise out of Jamaica in the 1970s. Very young, very precocious talent, which unfortunately and tragically was not allowed to reach its full fruition, as we will see. He was born in 1962, fourth and youngest child of a successful lawyer. Family was stable, solidly middle class, moved around a bit as a youth, finally settling in Eastern Kingston, going to high school there. Friends in the neighborhood included other up-and-coming aspiring singers. They were Winston McAniff, Wayne Wade, who would go on to work with Yabby U around 1976, and finally Earl Daly, who would begin his recording career under the name Earl 16 for the age he was when he started recording. Also the bass player Boris Gardner, famous Boris Gardner, was a family friend. All these exerted their pull on Hugh Mundell, getting involved in music from a very early age. He was also athletic, competitive runner, but by the age of 12, he had begun writing lyrics and singing and hanging around with his friends from the neighborhood who were all just as interested in music as he was. One day, he ended up hanging out at Joe Gibbs' studio during a session with his friends. They were involved in the recording of a song called Malcolm X, which one of them had written, which would end up being recorded by Dennis Brown. During that recording session, Hugh Mundell began singing a song called Where is Natty Dread? Joe Gibbs, the great producer, was intrigued by what he heard in Hugh Mundell's voice, recorded the song, but it was never released. Hugh Mundell, very early teenager still at this time, not unusual for these young kids to get started so young in the music business. Jamaica has a long tradition of these kind of child or teen stars, but Hugh Mundell had a gravity, a sense of purpose. Maybe others did not at his young age. His songs were extremely cultural in nature, talking about issues of black identity, of global politics, of economic deprivation. All these things, all these subjects coming from a youth from a very reasonably comfortable background for his time and his culture. began recording. As I said, Joe Gibbs recorded one tune, was never released. During that session, or the sessions at Joe Gibbs, there would be a fateful encounter that would change the course of Hugh Mundell's career. One of the musicians, the older musicians, kind of made a crack to Hugh Mundell that he should go and come back to the studio when he'd reached puberty. One of the other session musicians overheard this and took exception to that. His name was Augustus Pablo, the great melodica player and producer, who had his own stable of artists and musicians around his Rockers family. He stepped in to defend Hugh Mundell, and this cemented a friendship and personal and professional relationship between the two. That would be the greatest single influence on Hugh Mundell's life. Augustus Pablo took the young boy Hugh Mundell under his wing. They began, several weeks later, they began working together, doing some recording sessions. Hugh Mundell would fully be assimilated into Augustus Pablo's extended Rockers family and fully embrace a Rasta livity or way of life, reasoning, performing, honing his craft. He would be singing and hanging around the studios, learning about writing songs, all aspects of recording. At night, he would be performing live on the Augustus Pablo's Rockers sound system, where you would be DJing on the mic, as we just heard. For those DJing cuts, he would be identified as Ja Levi, whereas he would sing under his given name, Hugh Mundell. Here's one example right here. Rockers 12-inch single by Junior Delgado, produced by Augustus Pablo, with DJ chat by Ja Levi. Hugh Mundell as Ja Levi. But for the singing cuts, it was just strictly Hugh Mundell. And he began working over the next couple of years with his mentor, Augustus Pablo, recording such songs as Jah Will Provide, Why Do Black Man Fuss and Fight, recorded at Lee Perry's Black Ark studio, with arrangements by Lee Perry, but all other songs produced by Augustus Pablo. Rockers Repress, from Pressure Sounds, Jah Will Provide, another deeply cultural tune. Songs like Book of Life, Hugh Mundell, Rockers 10-inch single here. This is around 1976 to 1978. He is doing this intensive apprenticeship under Augustus Pablo. These sessions would finally see fruition as the seminal Africa Must Be Free by 1983 by Hugh Mundell LP, released around 1978 on Augustus Pablo's Message label. Message and various other Augustus Pablo labels. Seminal, classic, essential album of Jamaican music. Reggae authority Steve Barrow has called this one of the 100 greatest works of Jamaican music, while attributing much of its success to the production skills of Augustus Pablo and the backing by the extended family of Rockers musicians, Benbow on drums, Santa, Leroy, Horsemouth Wallace on drums, Robbie Shakespeare or Leroy Sibbles on bass during sessions for this album. A couple of young kids from the neighborhood got their first taste of recording in a studio. They were Wycliffe Steely Johnson and Cleveland Clevie Brown, who would go on to greater success in the 80s and 90s, got their start in sessions for this album. As well, Earl Chinna Smith, and of course, melodica and organ by Augustus Pablo himself. Very young Augustus Pablo, released 1978. Hugh Mundell is all of about 16 years old when this is released. You can hear his youthfulness in his voice, but the subject matter is of a very mature, very precocious standard. Songs like My Mind, which is very reflective for one his age. The title track, Africa Must Be Free by 1983, inspired by a speech by His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. Why Do Black Man Fuss and Fight, we just heard, credited to Ja Levi for the DJ chat. Run, Revolution to Come, Day of Judgment, Jah Will Provide, all these songs. The album was released, was universally acclaimed. Rolling Stone magazine gave it a 5-star review. Would never see a larger release on a bigger label until several years later, when it would finally appear on the Greensleeves label out of the UK. Here's the Greensleeves edition. This appeared in 1986, several years after the initial release, and unfortunately a few years after the unfortunate death of Hugh Mundell. Full-length dub version was also released. Africa Must Be Free by 1983 dub, mixed by Prince Jammy, then an up-and-coming producer still aligned with his mentor King Tubby. This would also appear on the Greensleeves label. Africa Must Be Free by 1983. Hugh Mundell right there with the Rockers Posse. Augustus Pablo right there, reasoning with the Dreads. Hugh Mundell would continue working with Pablo, honing his live performances as well. By 1980, he had made his first tour of Europe with some appearances in Paris, also in the UK. There were some hiccups with some where he didn't make some shows in London. He appeared on David Rodigan's radio show, was interviewed. Continued working with Augustus Pablo, but around 1980, the two men finally began to have a bit of a rift. While Mundell would never fully leave the Rockers camp, he was itching to take over more control of his own music, step out from under his mentor's wing, and take more control of his own music. He was feeling he wasn't being promoted fully. So his second LP, called Time and Place, appeared on his own Munrock label. Hugh Mundell, Time and Place, released 1980. Co-produced with Augustus Pablo, between himself and Augustus Pablo. Again, deeply cultural tracks, Time and Place, Short Man, which is an ode to His Majesty. Time Has Come, but starting to see his subject matter loosen up a bit. Feeling All Right Girl, Can't Pop No Style on I, kind of loosening up his subject matter a bit to take in more, I guess you would say, romantic-themed lyrics. In the early 80s, the Jah Fire LP would appear, credited to Hugh Mundell, though actually only 3 tracks on here are recorded by him. The cover's been amended to reflect that, which it did not initially. Laxley Castell takes the bulk of the tracks on here. Another singer who was a friend of Hugh Mundell, young singer called Laxley Castell, also ill-fated. Princess Lady, title track of one of his LPs, also appears on here, Be My Princess Lady. Only 3 tracks on this LP are by Hugh Mundell: Jah Fire, Walk with Jah, and King of Israel, keeping up the intensely cultural subject matter, but credited to Hugh Mundell solely on initial release, and produced by King Jammy, now known as King Jammy. He's been promoted from Prince Jammy since he mixed that Africa Must Be Free by 1983 dub. So this is LP, or these 3 tracks on that LP, are Hugh Mundell's first step completely away from the mentorship of Augustus Pablo. In 1981, he made his first U.S. appearances with some live shows in around the Berkeley and San Francisco area, which were well received. He had a cold for one of the shows. The crowd was very receptive, although some of the pickup bands that he had to use did not mesh well with his vocal style, apparently. In 1982, he would switch over to producer Henry Junjo Laws, the Badman producer, who was then ruling reggae music. He had Henry Junjo Laws brought in, or didn't bring in, but utilized a new session band called the Roots Radix, who revolutionized reggae in the first couple of years of the 1980s and the latter part of the 1970s with a harder, sparser sound, much more aggressive, much more driving sound, using the mixing skills of Scientist. There was a perfect match for a different sound, which heralded the early dancehall era. Hugh Mundell came out with an album simply called Mundell. Again, classics on here. Jacqueline, again, loosening up his subject matter again, freeing himself up to pursue different subjects, but still a predominance of very Rasta-themed lyrics. Red, Gold, and Green, Rasta Have the Handle, all classics, along with, again, more reflective songs, 24 hours a day, showing maybe the more thoughtful, more meditative side of Hugh Mundell. This would also appear on the Greensleeves label. More mixed reviews on this. Music reporter Vivian Goldman reportedly called this Hugh Mundane, kind of a diss, but another very successful LP for Hugh Mundell with the production skills of Henry Junjo Laws, recorded at Channel 1, mixed by Scientist and Roots Radix Band on the Musical Attack. I also have a different pressing of this, which bizarrely has the back cover of the Greensleeves issue as the front. And this is some kind of a Jamaican pressing. Actually sounds pretty good. Yellow label on that side, and pink on the front. Hugh Mundell, Mundell LP. As I said, he didn't fully cut his ties with his mentor Augustus Pablo, remaining in touch with the Rockers crew, contributing backing vocals to Augustus Pablo's 1983 album Earth's Rightful Ruler. In 1983, through the Shanachie label, Black Man's Foundation would appear. This repeated several of the tracks from the earlier Time and Place album, Black Man's Foundation. Hugh Mundell looking dapper there. On Randall Grass's Shanachie label from the US. Hugh Mundell. Again, predominance of cultural lyrics, repeats Can't Pop No Style, and several of the tracks from the Time and Place album. But his focus would be on self-production and work away from Augustus Pablo, and releasing his music on his own Munrock label. One 12-inch I have here on the Munrock label. Hugh Mundell with Hey Good Looking. Lyric that maybe would have been unthinkable to those just discovering him in 1978 through that seminal Africa Must Be Free by 1983 release. Here paired with the dub version on CD from the RAS label in the US. 1983 would see Hugh Mundell recording more sparingly, focusing as the months went by on live appearances on sound system. Well-known sounds like Kilimanjaro he would appear on. At the beginning of October 1983, in 1978 actually he had taken on his own apprentice, a 13-year-old kid he met called Junior Reed that he mentored, recorded his very first song called Speak the Truth. He would mentor Junior Reed, who would go on to a successful career in music that continues to this day. He would discovered him, mentored him, was tutoring him in the music business. The two were very close friends. In beginning of October 1983, the two of them had driven down to Montego Bay for a bit, returned to Kingston, and found Mundell's house had been burgled. Some of his personal items had been taken. They figured out who it was. There was a known burglar who had been spotted by neighbors. Hugh Mundell and Junior Reed went to peacefully confront this man. Hugh Mundell drove him to the police station and turned him over to the police. However, 2 days later, they were again driving around in Hugh Mundell's car. Hugh was in the front with his girlfriend, Junior Reed. Young Junior Reed was in the back seat. They were driving around when they were flagged down in the street by a man. They stopped. Hugh Mundell realized that this was the brother of the man who he had just sent to jail a couple of days before. This man confronted them and demanded that his brother be released from prison. Hugh Mundell said, "I won't do that until I get my personal property back." At that point, the man pulled a gun out of his waistband. Hugh Mundell saw what was happening, tried to put the car into gear and get away, but a shot rang out, entered Hugh Mundell's head. He was rushed to hospital, but unfortunately was taken off life support later that day, bringing a tragic and premature end to a very prodigious talent that would never reach its full fruition. So that is my look at Hugh Mundell. Hope you enjoyed, guys. Cheers.